So welcome everybody to Art for the Asking, a history of the graphic arts loan collection at the Morrison Library. This event is being recorded, and this is the first event in a series we're calling Graphic Knowledge, Perspectives on Prints and Printmaking at UC Berkeley. I want to thank everybody involved with this event today, as well as the series: Amber Lawrence, Randy Husong, Todd Olson, and Jennifer Osgood. Now, the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, its mission is to support the art education curriculum on campus and to further the appreciation of art among students at UC Berkeley. In this series and this event in this series is a response to COVID-19 shutting down the Graphic Arts Loan Collection this semester and probably for the year, as well as a printmaking studio on campus. And like I said, this is the first event in this series, and today we'll be talking a little bit about the history of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. And I'll also be in conversation with Lucy Stark and Madison Nelson, two printmakers that won printmaking awards at UC Berkeley when they were students, and two printmakers with prints in the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. Now, the second event in our series is called How to Make an Impression, a tour and history of presses at two printmaking studios. Artist and Professor Randy Husong will give a tour of the printmaking studio on the UC Berkeley campus, and Jennifer Osgood will give a tour of the Peter Koch studio in West Berkeley. The third event in our series is called Lasting Impressions, an art historian's perspective on printmaking and the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, with history of art professor Todd Olson and art practice and art history major undergraduate Elby Cartagenes. Our last event in the series is Impressive Art, an artist panel on printmaking. And artist and art practice faculty member Randy Husong will talk to Susan Bailu, Emily Guy, and Robin McCloskey about printmaking, the prints of theirs that we recently purchased for the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, as well as what art they live with at home. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation today, but feel free to put questions in the chat during the presentation. And thanks everybody for coming. And so now we'll turn to the history of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. And so what is a Graphic Arts Loan Collection? So the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, or Galc, is a collection of framed original lithographs, etchings, engravings, and other works of art that students, faculty, and staff at UC Berkeley can borrow from the Morrison Library. Students can have up to 2 prints checked out at a time during an academic year. Prints are due back at the end of April each academic year. And it began in 1958, and it is now 62 years old. Now, to check out a print, you can just go to our website, which is galc.lib.berkeley.edu. And this website was created in 2008 and redesigned in 2016. After you've kind of browsed or searched for something on our website, and you found something, and right here we have Ellsworth Kelly, Red, Orange, and Blue, which is one of our most popular prints. You can reserve this print, but you also need to go to look at the borrowing agreement and electronically sign that. Then what happens is that staff at the Morrison Library will then get the print and package it up and send an email back letting you know when to come pick up your print. And you can come pick up prints during Morrison Library open hours. But again, that wasn't the way that prints always circulated. And before we had our website, most of the prints circulated through students first looking at a catalog that was created every quarter or every semester, and looking at what prints we had and kind of deciding beforehand what prints they wanted to check out, and then coming to the Morrison Library to actually grab those prints. And over the years, it was common for students to line up the night before the prints would start circulating in order to get the prints they desired. And this became such a thing that in January 6, 1965, in a letter from University librarian Donald Connie to Richard Hafner, who was the UC Berkeley Public Affairs Office, he said, when we rent out the prints from the Graphic Arts Loan Collection at the beginning of each semester, there's usually a gathering of students outside the front door of the Doe building, connecting commencing the night before the distribution. As you know, they wait up all night in order to get an early choice of the prints which have been exhibited the week before in the Morrison Library. It has been suggested to me that you might be interested in some special publicity for this event as a counter to the Sproul Hall sit-in. Ours is a sit-out. Usually the San Francisco Press covers the affair. This year, the sit-out will commence Friday night, 12th February, in preparation for the Galc distribution on Saturday, 13th of February, rain permitting. And so right here, we have the university librarian kind of trying to use this publicity of what was happening every time the prints started to circulate each semester as kind of a counter to the protests that were happening on Sproul Hall at the time, the free speech movement. And again, standing in line became such a thing that at the start of every semester, they also gave out little leaflets, flyers, handouts to students to explain how they could go about checking out a print. And one of the first things on this, this handout was a Q&A, and the first question on that Q&A was, how early do I need to be here Saturday morning to get the prints I want? And the answer to that question is, that's a tough one to answer. If the prints you've picked out are extremely popular, you may have to wait in line overnight, seriously. It's a 24-year-old UC Berkeley campus tradition. In past years, some students have brought sleeping bags and picnics. But if you like prints which no one else happens to want, you can arrive at 10 a.m. and find them still here. So at the beginning of the spring quarter in 1967, David Smith, a biology student, waited 25 hours and 15 minutes to borrow a lithograph by Renoir. And this is the lithograph right here, Odalesque. It's no longer in our collection. It was one of the prints that was sold off to create the endowment fund that now runs, that we use to run the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. So once students were inside after waiting in line, this is how the Morrison Library would look. There would be prints hung and stacked up all over the room that students could go through and look at and decide on what they wanted. These would be organized, you know, by the numbers in the catalog so that students could actually find them a little easier once they looked at a catalog and knew what they wanted to check out. And again, sometimes while the prints were up for 2 weeks, there would be other students who would want to come there to read the newspapers, read some magazines, read some books, and that would be a little bit disturbing to them. And the Morrison librarian at the time had this to say: the Morrison patrons complained mildly that they couldn't get at the books they wanted. The room was too noisy, there were too many people moving around, but the librarian reported that the vast majority of opinions registered were enthusiastically affirmative. And again, the Graphic Arts Loan Collection was very popular, but you know, even the people that were in the rooms at the time, I'm sure were like, you know, this is a great program, even though it was a little disruptive if they're trying to read their newspapers that day. And so when the students checked out a print, they would sign a Graphic Arts Loan Collection contract, the paper form. They would pay $1 per print. Each one was, you know, $1. Then there was a Graphic Arts Loan Collection checkout card that their name was put on under that, the name for that print, so we knew who checked it out and when. And then they were given a receipt that let them know that when the print was due, and a fine of 50 cents a day would be charged if returned after that due date. And then the students would take those prints home after they were packaged up and put in bags and with corners. And like this student is on the cover of the October 8th, 1976 edition of the Daily Cal. And it says, a rainy day did not stop more than 300 art-loving students who began lining up in the dark of early Saturday morning to get first shot at the university's Graphic Arts Loan Collection. And so how did this come about? The idea of an art lending program started percolating in the early 1950s, but it languished until Herwin Schaefer came to UC Berkeley in 1956 as a professor in the decorative arts program. Herwin Schaefer was approached by the university librarian, Donald Coney, and he was asked about selecting a collection of print reproductions for the Morrison Library that students could check out. And Professor Schaefer's response to this was, why don't you offer original works of art instead of reproductions of works of art? And he said Picasso made lithographs as well as paintings, and that original graphic works were no more expensive than good color reproductions of paintings. And he said the university could assemble a collection of works touched by the hand of the artist and make them available to students as an extension of the university's art teaching program. And furthermore, living for a time with a lithograph, an etching, or a woodcut by an artist of our time will awaken or strengthen the desire in the student for art as a natural and necessary part of their life. Should they wish to own a work of art, they will find that many original prints are within their reach. And this was one of the driving forces of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection too, to get students to appreciate art, but also to know that, you know, they could actually become art collectors themselves. And so on the inaugural exhibition for the Graphic Arts Loan Collection was September 22nd, 1958 at 4 p.m. And for the next 10 days or so, prints were put up around the room and people could come in and look at the collection. And that was the original invitation. This is the original poster. And this is the original catalog for the exhibition and for the prints that year. And so we can see that there were 158 prints, and Herwin Schaefer wrote an introduction. And during the time that the prints were up and for the public to view, more than 5,000 guests passed through the Morrison Library. All 158 prints were borrowed within 2 hours once they started circulating after the exhibition was done. And the original collection comprised a survey of art movements and artists from Baroque to Cubism and from Rembrandt to Murrow. And the San Francisco Chronicle covered this event, and from this article, the writer said, a person who takes trouble to rent a favorite artwork in his youth, particularly at 7 in the morning, is sure to want to buy an artwork before he gets much older. And again, from the first time that the prints were circulated, there were people showing up in the mornings to get what they wanted. And so the collection started with 100 prints purchased in New York City and San Francisco by Herwin Schaefer with $5,000 from the Columbia Foundation. Eight prints were given to the collection by private donors, and 50 prints were given to UC Berkeley by the International Graphic Arts Association. And the prints that were given to Berkeley by the International Arts Society, this is what Herwin Schaefer had to say. He said, almost none of the prints are really wonderful, but almost none are really bad either. These were commissioned at $2 a print with an edition of 200, which gave the artist $400 per print. The paper alone would deduct 100 from that. This low amount of money meant that all the better artists refused to participate. One might hope that with Rockefeller money, they would have raised the stipend and gotten better artists for the 50 prints they will be distributing. And so what he meant by the Rockefeller money is that the International Graphic Arts Society, it was founded in New York in 1951 as a nonprofit membership organization. And its aims were to foster the development and appreciation, knowledge and understanding of the fine arts in the graphic fields. And in 1956, with money from the Rockefeller Foundation, IGAS started a print rental project with 6 universities. And that was Brown University, Indiana University, Sarah Lawrence College, University of Minnesota, Syracuse University, and Wellesley College. And these colleges would get 50 free frame prints from the International Graphic Arts Society. And they could keep these prints as long as they added at least $150 in new prints to their collection each year for 5 years. And then in 1958, the program expanded with another 25 institutions, and University of California was part of this program then. Now, in the International Graphic Arts Society, the executive director, Theodore J. H. Gustin, he sent his wife, Mrs. Gustin, to UC Berkeley on October 7th, 1958, to get a look at the graphic arts loan collection program firsthand to assess how it was doing. And this is something they were doing with all the programs in the IGAS lending program. And so she came to UC Berkeley, and this did not go well. First of all, Mrs. Gustin was annoyed that university librarian Donald Coney couldn't meet her, and she was angry that UCB had purchased prints other than the IGAS to start its collection. And she took offense that Professor Schaefer was in New York City doing this when he met with IGAS representatives at the same time. But things really went south when they went out to lunch that day, and Mrs. Gustin was accompanied by not only Professor Schaefer, but Carl Kasten, the artist and founder of the printmaking program and printmaking studio at UC Berkeley. During this lunch, Professor Schaefer made it apparent to Mrs. Gustin that he considered the IGAS collection something less than excellent. And so obviously this didn't sit well with her. And when she got back to New York, she talked to her husband, and on November 17, 1958, Theodore Gustin wrote university librarian Donald Coney wrote him a letter, and in this letter he said, "As to the criticism of the quality of the 50 prints from our collection, I wish to advise as follows. From experience, we do know that it is most unpleasant and even annoying if one is forced by circumstances, beyond his control to use teaching aids which one considers inadequate. Your board and faculty had to accept the offered collection before they had the opportunity to see these 50 prints. In order to relieve your faculty of the unpleasant association with prints they considered of low quality, we propose that the rental service, so far as the 50 IGAS prints are concerned, be terminated by the end of the scholastic year in 1958-59. And so this one kind of confrontation led to IGAS trying to boot Berkeley out of this program. But then in December 1st, 1958, Donald Coney replied that it seems to me it would be too bad to terminate what is already a successful venture. All the International Graphic Arts prints were borrowed at the close of our exhibition in October, and I see no reason to believe they will not meet with the same enthusiasm at the beginning of the second semester. This is consistent with your objective of encouraging an interest in the graphic arts. And I'm sure you have had a good deal of experience with the difference of opinion that sometimes arises between people who hold art in high regard and recognize that there is usually room for a wide latitude of judgment over given examples. The ready acceptance of the IGAS prints by the students for whom they were intended would seem to offer appropriate testimony. And so after the IGAS advisory board discussed this issue, read Donald Coney's letter, it was agreed that UC Berkeley would continue on as part of the IGS print rental program. As long as they wrote the required annual report that evaluated the program upon which the IGAS would decide if it was a successful partnership or not and worth pursuing. And this was a successful program, a successful partnership. And so they did go on with this program, and all those original prints that were given by IGAS became part of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, and we still have some of those in our collection today. So another interesting tidbit of history about the Graphic Arts Loan Collection was that in 1960, William de Kooning was in the Bay Area, and he visited the printmaking studio at UC Berkeley. And their fellow artists and friends, Carl Kasten, Nathan Oliveira, and George Miyazaki, kind of talked to him about creating a print. William de Kooning had never actually created a print before. And so they basically said, like, hey, while you're here, create a print. And so the three of them went off to the bar, and they left Kooning in the printmaking studio with 2 lithograph stones that were 4 feet high, and he used a mop to create in about an hour 2 explosive images, lithograph 1 and lithograph 2, otherwise sometimes known as waves 1 and waves 2. And these prints were seen by some art historians as harbingers of the American print renaissance that transformed the history of printmaking in this country. Less than 10 impressions were made of each lithograph, and an impression of litho number 1 was given to the Graphic Arts Loan Collection at the time. It was sold in 1992 for $40,000, and this money substantially enlarged the Morrison Endowment Fund. And so when we're talking about the Morrison Endowment Fund, this was created through selling off prints in 1977 and 1987. And these are prints that were too valuable to circulate. And after these 2 collections were sold, or these prints from these 2 time periods, there was $92,000 to establish the Graphic Arts Loan Endowment Fund. And this is kind of how the program survives today. At the same time that they were talking about, selling off some prints to have an endowment fund to support the program, it was also recommended in 1971 and 1977 that some of the valuable prints in the Graphic Arts Loan Collection be moved to the University Art Museum, what is now BAM PFA. And there were 30 prints that were selected, and Rouault's Portrait of Verlaine and Feininger's Village Scene were 2 of those prints that were recommended to go to the University Art Museum. And then on February 28th, 1983, these 30 prints were moved from the Morrison Library to the University Art Museum. And these are photographs right here of these prints being moved that day. And then for the next couple decades, there was some controversy about who actually owns these prints. The library said that they had lent them to the art museum, and the art museum had said that they were given to the art museum. And so this was a problem, and then that usually art directors and university librarians would talk about. And in this letter from Kevin Consey, director of the Berkeley Art Museum, to University Librarian Thomas Leonard, that was dated 8/18/2004, he said, "It seems like this is an occasion for every university librarian to write each art museum and film archive director on this topic once in one's tenure. Like the film Groundhog Day, we are caught in a time warp, apparently with a way out of repetition." And again, Tom Leonard had taken over as a new university librarian, and so that's when he wrote this letter asking about these prints for the art museum to give them back. And that didn't happen, but you would think there'd be some contention, but really the art museum and the Graphic Arts Loan Collection have worked together throughout the years. And in 1983, it was the 25th anniversary of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, and this was celebrated at the University Art Museum. with those prints that were given to from the library to the Art Museum. And then in 2008, it was the 50th anniversary of the Graphic Arts Loan Museum, and this was also celebrated at the Berkeley Art Museum. And then in 2018, it was the 60 years of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection, and for this exhibition that was up in the Brown Gallery, two prints, Rouault's Verlaine After the Death Mask and Feininger's Spruce and Sun, were both lent back to the library for this exhibition. And I will say that, you know, the prints were a great addition to the exhibition, and they were returned to the University Art Museum without a problem. And so another thing that over the years is that has kind of happened, and I'll get emails all the time from students that'll say things like, oh, it was great. The Graphic Arts Loan Collection is amazing. Thank you for having this program. And in this letter, and so it's these, letters had come in over the years, and I've gotten emails since I've been running the Morrison Library. But in this letter from 1963, a student says, thank you to you and the staff of Morrison Library for making it possible to borrow prints. I've always enjoyed my prints, and I've come to appreciate the graphic arts. This is my last semester at the university. In February, I began teaching Spanish in junior high school and will begin my own graphic arts loan collection. And then 20 years later, in 1983, there was another letter that I found in my files when I took over. I hope this program continues for a long, long time, and it is not threatened by any epidemics of budget cuts and such. And yes, the Graphic Arts Loan Collection has survived budget cuts because we've had our own endowment fund, as well as it's going to survive the current epidemic. But so in 2017, we started the Galc Experience blog, and this was created for students to share their experiences of living with art for a year. And this is, again, kind of taking everybody's thoughts that we had gotten through letters or through emails and kind of putting them on the website, and it would be a way for students from the past to talk to students of the future. And if somebody was thinking about checking out a print, they could look at a print and see how a student from the past lived with that print and how they experienced it, how they enjoyed it. And in this blog post from Andrew Stevens, or this post on our Galc Experience blog, he says, I borrowed artwork from the Graphic Arts Loan Collection every year during my time at Berkeley as a graduate student. The Galc helped me realize that art, curated, original, unique art is something that can be accessible and engaged with on a personal level. One ought not to believe that art is only for museums or the wealthy. Indeed, I have now decided to try and buy original art from emerging artists to decorate my home, rather than purchase mass-produced plastic canvases from big box stores. Galc had a large role in shaping my views on how one can choose to engage in art. And again, this is one of the things that is great about the program. And another thing is that so many times when we get people who donate art to the collection, it's that they were also students at one time at UC Berkeley that were introduced to art and introduced to being able to collect art through the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. So they become collectors, and then they give prints to us that then go back in circulation that students can use, can take home with them, live with, and then they become art collectors themselves. And it's kind of like this great, circle of life that the collection participates in. And as of right now, there are currently 9 other art lending programs at universities and colleges in the United States. But the Graphic Arts Loan Collection has the distinction of being the only one of these programs run by a university library. All the others are run by the university art museums. And there are more than 900 prints of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection now, and around 100 are too valuable to circulate. And these are ones that we bring out at exhibitions and special occasions, but students, won't be able to check them out because they're worth too much. And so now I'm kind of going to segue out of the history of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection and to the Art Practice and University Library Printmaking Award. And so when I was looking through my files, I came across this letter from 1959 that actually talked about, adding prints from students who are in art practice in the printmaking studio at Berkeley. And in this conversation between Mrs. Warden and Mark Gittleson of the library, they talk about how I spoke to Mr. Caston about this yesterday, and he enthusiastically endorsed the scheme. He remarked that something like this had been simmering in his mind for a long time. He'd be happy to be the one to select the winning print each year. He also thought it would be wise to pay the student for the print, say $10 or so. Well, so as far as I know, this actually never happened. And so there was never any printmaking award given and no print that was actually donated to the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. But in 2018, we started up the Art Practice and University Library Printmaking Award. And this is between the library and the Art Practice department. And the winner of this prize received $500 in cash, and the prints were added to the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. They could either donate one print or up to 2 prints if they wanted to, and it was of their choosing. They got to kind of decide what would represent them in the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. And the award is given to an undergraduate who demonstrates an exceptional commitment to the art of printmaking. And what was looked at, the criteria is print aesthetic, subject content development, technical control, process experimentation, print theory, multiple or unique works that demonstrate exceptional commitment to the medium of fine art and printmaking. And so the first award winner was Alexandra Grabeau, and she won it in 2018. And these are 2 of her prints, Expands and Experiments. And they're both prints that once we added to the collection, students were checking out immediately. Unfortunately, Alexandra was supposed to be part of the artist panel that will be coming up in a few minutes, but she couldn't make it here tonight. But we are joined by Lucy Stark and Madison Nelson, who will be talking about printmaking and the Graphic Arts Loan Collection. And I'll start off with Lucy Stark. She is the winner of the 2017 UC Berkeley Excellence in Printmaking Award. And this was actually the award that was given before the Graphic Arts Loan Collection Award was created. So unfortunately, she didn't get the $500 cash or the print added to the collection, though since then we have actually purchased from her a couple of her prints that are pretty fantastic. And so Lucy, again, she was a winner of the 2017 UC Berkeley Excellence in Printmaking Award. And since graduating, she has spent the last 3 years in the East Bay, where she has been involved with multiple arts organizations, including having a studio at Root Division and volunteering at Creative Growth. She is also involved with Max's Garage Press, has held jobs at the Gaussian Gallery and Paulson Fontaine Press, which is her current job. And she teaches art to children in Alameda. And Madison Nelson, she is the most recent winner of the Graphic Arts Loan Collection Award, and she's won it in 2020. And she's an artist from San Diego who found an interest in art at a young age, earning awards and honors in art throughout high school, while also starting a small art business. This inspired her to pursue an art degree at UC Berkeley. Madison has a background in painting, but while at Berkeley, she took an interest in exploring other mediums such as graphite, ballpoint pen, and printmaking. And so I want to welcome both Lucy and Madison. and we'll start our conversation now. So we'll start off with a couple questions. The first one will be, can you speak a little bit about the pieces that we have in the Graphic Arts Loan Collection from you? And I guess, Lucy, do you want to take this first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So these are 3 prints that I made in my last semester at Berkeley. 2 of them are in the collection, and that is the feet and the trash print. The 3rd piece that went with the other 2, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, sold out. One of the great things about doing printmaking at Berkeley is our print sale. So students and community members can come and see what the students are making and buy their prints. So I only have one of those left. But I made this series kind of wanting to take something like gross or boring, like a bathroom, and create a series of really like fun, whimsical, colorful prints, kind of turning that idea of a bathroom on its head. These were really fun to make because they're kind of a puzzle. I used pink, yellow, and blue as my 3 colors, and then used transparent base to create my secondary. So the purple, greens, and oranges you see are just from layering different colors on top of one another. We can go to the next slide for my other, oh yeah. So this was another piece that's in the collection. I had originally made this print as part of an installation in the Worthrider Gallery. So I screen printed the wallpaper and then had the individual panels as prints. And what's interesting about this print is that you can kind of size up or down depending on how many panels you have. So I gave the Graphic Arts collection 4 prints, so you can kind of fit them into a kaleidoscope pattern. This piece, the installation, was kind of inspired by another print that I had made in the studio of a house with a bunch of different rooms using a lot of patterns and textiles, and kind of wanted to bring one of those illustrations to life. So yeah.
Great. Thanks a lot, Lucy. And I will say that we actually purchased these after the fact, after she graduated. And yeah, they're prints that we imagine students will love, but they haven't had a chance to check them out yet, since we haven't had a chance, since the Graphic Arts Loan Collection isn't going on right now in the fall semester. And so, Madison, do you want to tell us a little bit about the pieces that you have in the Graphic Arts Loan Collection that we have?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'll start by talking about the piece on the right first, the one of the car. This print was inspired by my love for cars and my own personal vehicle. Ever since I was a young girl, like before I can remember, I've had an interest in cars. My uncle was a mechanic, and I was surrounded by them all the time. And I've always wanted to own a Mustang. That was like my favorite car. And I started saving when I was in high school, and I started saving by creating my own artwork and selling my own artwork. And I was able to earn enough to buy this car when I was in college. And it was a lot of financial planning that went into that. It wasn't something that happened right away. It was years and years and years of looking ahead, planning. And I like that story because it really feeds into the piece itself, because anyone who's ever done any type of printmaking before, they know how much planning it takes to get to the final piece in the end. It's not something you really know what it looks like until it's totally finished. And this piece definitely speaks to that, because first of all, there's 3 different plates, because there's 1 plate per color. So you have to think about how those colors are going to layer. You have to think about the order of the plates, because that also matters in the final product. And you also have to think about what kind of techniques you're going to use to try and get the textures and the lines that you want. And so it, similar to how it took a long time for me to eventually purchase my dream car, it took a long time to create this peach that was like an homage to reaching my dream and reaching my goal of purchasing this car. The piece on the left is a plate that was etched totally black. It was a little bit of an experiment for me. It was something I had never tried before, but I was more or less inspired by one of the pieces that's hanging in the printmaking hallway. Someone did the same style where they etched the whole plate black and scraped away the etching that was there to reveal the image. And so I kind of wanted to play around with that style and see what I could create. And I actually found this quite difficult because it's hard to gauge how hard you press to how much it takes away and how much image there is left behind. So I'm happy with the way that it came out. Although if I were to do it again, I probably would press a lot more lightly because it's surprising how much pressure it takes to really like pull away the metal. As for the subject matter, I'm someone who grew up around horses. I rode horses since the age of 7, so for about 16 years now, and they were always a really big part of my life. And so I wanted to create art around subject matter that I'm passionate about, but subject matter that I'm also very familiar with, and combine that with a technique that I had never used before. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Madison. Yeah, I mean, I just love how these two prints that you donated to the collection thematically go together, you know, but in much different ways. And I think people can, you know, figure that out too. And so the second question, we'll move to another question. So, and Madison, we'll continue with you. How and why did you get interested in printmaking? And how did coming to UC Berkeley influence this? And then kind of the second part in, you know, what is your preferred print process or the combinations of?
So I actually dabbled a little bit in printmaking when I was in high school. I had a teacher that taught us not lithography, but linoleum printing, where you carve out kind of this eraser type material. And so I did a little bit of that in high school, and I really enjoyed it. And when I came to Berkeley, I saw that there were printmaking classes, and I knew immediately that I really wanted to try them, not only because they offered that specific type of printmaking, but they offered printmaking that I had never even heard of before. But it took me a while to get into those classes because they're so highly impacted and everyone loves the printmaking classes. So it's really hard to get in, and you kind of have to have seniority to get in. But once I got in, it was exactly what I expected. And I guess I really fell in love with it because I'm someone who traditionally, I usually do like painting or drawing, and it's so different from that. And my style is usually very hyper real. I like to create very realistic artwork. And I think printmaking kind of forces you out of that box. And I liked that it forced me out of that box because I'm someone who has a really hard time pulling myself out of that box of the style that I'm really comfortable in. As for my preferred process, I think once I really tried the process of etching the whole plate black like I did with the horse piece, I found that I actually really prefer that. So if I were to continue printmaking, I'd probably experiment even more with that because I really did enjoy it.
Great, thanks, Madison. Yeah, and I think the slides that are up right now are for Lucy. And so Lucy, Lucy asked the same question. How and why did you get interested in printmaking, and how did coming to UC Berkeley influence this, and what is your preferred print process?
Sure. So yeah, just like how Madison was saying, the print classes at Berkeley are just it's a hot ticket item. Everyone wants to get in. Sometimes it's like goes to a lottery system, which can be very stressful. So the first print class that I ended up taking was a summer course before my junior year. And that was an experimental printmaking class. I think it was called Radical Printmaking with Sahar. And in that class, we weren't in the print studio. So we were using kind of unconventional printmaking techniques. And one project that we did was screen printing, and we used the sun to expose our screen. And so when she introduced this project, she showed us this video of these picnic prints that you can see in the slide, and they were from the Herman Miller Company picnic prints. One of their designers, Stephen Fryklom, made a print for each year in the 70s for their company picnic. And when I saw those being printed, it was so satisfying, you know, like the flats of color, the bright colors. As you can see behind me, I did track one down on eBay. So I just kind of became obsessed with them. And that's what really made me inspired to take a printmaking class. My first printmaking class in the print studio ended up being an intaglio class, which I knew way less about. And that's the piece on the right on the screen. That was one of my first etchings. And I think the interesting thing about that print was that I was using aqua tint to get tones of color, and I ended up treating it kind of as a screen print, or maybe something that would have been better suited for screen printing, which was kind of solid layers of color, one on top of the other, and to create this image. So I think once I made that one, it kind of became clear that I was really meant for the screen printing technique versus intaglio. So that, after that experience, I would say my preferred technique would be screen printing. But since graduation, I have spent a lot of time at Max's Garage Press in Berkeley, where they have multiple risograph machines. I think the print studio also got one of those at Berkeley, but that was also after my time. And that is a technique that's similar to a Xerox machine, but it prints one color at a time using ink drums. So it's kind of like an automatic screen printing process. This is really attractive to me as a graduate, because I didn't have access to the big, beautiful studio and all of the resources. And I just kind of wanted to get my ideas down quickly. And you know, I had to start getting a job, and maybe it was also out of laziness, but risograph really, it's instant gratification. So you can see in these two prints on the screen how I'm kind of using similar style choices, cut paper, flats of color, kind of bold pattern. But with Riso, I was able to get 100 times as many screen prints if I wanted to, with just a press of a button. So those are kind of the two different techniques that I've been working with most.
Great, thanks to both of you. And I mean, I think it's, you know, it's interesting how the prints, Madison was talking about how like the process of taking so long to create a print and then kind of graduating and moving to get something. This doesn't take as much as of a process. And then I'll ask one more question, then maybe we'll turn this over to the crowd for any questions. So do you guys want to talk about what you're working on now? And what it's like to make prints during the pandemic, or, you know, if you are able to. And Lucy, we'll go back to you, and if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think that there's a slide. Oh yeah, there is. So since graduating and more recently, I think this was probably came out of working at Max's and risograph. So there's a size limit when you're working with a risograph. So I was never able to work very big again. So I think out of that, I kind of needed to break out of those confines, and I started doing these more large scale paintings. So that's what you see on the left. That's one of my like dinner party scene paintings. I think my painting style is also very influenced by my screen printing background. I also use flats of color, kind of simplified pattern and texture as my details. So that's kind of something that I'm in the middle of. It was difficult to do any kind of printmaking during quarantine. All of the print studios that I'm aware of were shut down, and so I was left with painting, which was great. It was a nice kind of change of pace. And then on the right, that's a print from Paulson Fontaine Press, where I work. And I was originally hired as the gallery assistant, but a few months ago, I started working in the studio with the printers, and one of kind of my responsibilities is print curation. And what that means is basically we're printing these really large scale intaglio etchings. And when you're working at that size, I think that piece there is about 40 inches by 40. And when you're printing that big, the paper kind of stretches and moves, the blankets kind of shift around, and you're left with all of these little offset areas that the printers then fill in. So I wanted to include that because it was kind of an interesting juxtaposition between kind of the risograph, like instant, easy, ready-made, and then now I find myself back in this kind of like very laborious, really beautiful and intricate print experience. And I don't know, just kind of thinking, it has gotten me thinking about, you know, how much time you spend on these prints, kind of like how Madison was saying, and kind of the value that's placed on that.
Great, thanks a lot, Lucy. And then Madison, do you want to like talk a little bit about maybe what you're working on now and
Yeah, so
effectively what's going on?
So similar to what Lucy was saying, access to a printmaking studio right now is hard to come by or non-existent. And if I had access, I definitely would be, but unfortunately that's not the case. And you know, I did also lose half of my semester due to the pandemic, so that kind of is unfortunate. But it's caused me to kind of revert back to my roots a little bit, which is okay. I fell into a rut for a while where, you know, you're kind of home and you're hanging out and, you know, have nothing to do. So I'm like, well, you know, I might as well start making art again. And I had a couple people that asked me to do pieces for them, and it forced me to get back into what I love doing. And I had a lady who I know through my mom. Her dog recently died, and so she asked me to do a portrait of her animal. So that's what I'm working on right now. You'll see in the first two photos. I have a very like strict like process that I stick to when I do these types of pieces of work. I do grid all of my photos. I like to stick as true to the photo as I can, because when people ask for artworks like this, that's kind of what they're looking for. They want something to remember their animal or remember whatever it is they're asking me to paint. So they give me a photo, I grid it, and I put it on a canvas, and I try to stick as close to the photo as I possibly can. So that's what you'll see in the first two photos. The next photo you'll see all the way on the right is another one I'm working on of my horse trainer's personal horse. So she's someone who has really helped my horse come along in its training, and I wanted to thank her by doing a portrait of her personal horse. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Great, thanks Madison, and thanks Lucy. And so we're really at time right now, but if we can hang around a little bit, if anybody has any questions they want to ask Madison or Lucy or myself, you know, feel free to put it in the chat right now. And I'll be looking at the chat. So looks like we're not having any questions. Well, before we go, I'll throw one thing out there. So the Graphic Arts Loan Collection is about like living with other people's art and being kind of influenced by art. And, you know, is there any pieces of art or any artists that you kind of have lived with, you know, maybe not now, but in the past that have been really influential, like any one or two pieces where you become really intimate with that piece of art and it kind of influences, you know, what you're doing as an artist? And let's see, I'll go back to Lucy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think besides creating my own art, collecting and finding other people's art, either friends or like the picnic print behind me, I love to collect and curate my own space. So that has been really important to me. And you can see behind me, lovely Tamar's print. So yeah, I think it's really personal when you get a print from a friend or a mentor. And that's another thing that I really enjoy about printing at Max's Garage Press. The community there is really great. Everyone's super nice, and you kind of have like a bank of really awesome artists and you know, peers who are always ready to trade or, you know, tell each other how they got a certain color or how they mixed this ink or that ink. So I think right now I have so many pieces from just local artists and people that I know from around the Bay Area. And I think it's so much, it feels, I don't know, more comforting or homey to know the people behind the work rather than kind of like how you were saying in the beginning, getting like a generic poster from IKEA or like Pier 1. You know, it feels good to kind of know the source and know that these people are making art in the same time and place that you are.
Great, thanks, Lucy. And Madison, do you have any like pieces of art or anything you live with, or like, you know, maybe like people, artists that you've worked with or you've gotten commissions from? Or
Yeah, so right now I'm kind of in between moving situations, so I don't have any particular pieces of art hanging in my home, but I do plan to change that. As for drawing inspiration, I was actually really inspired by my fellow classmates and a lot of the techniques that I saw them achieve. And I also really loved seeing a lot of the examples that Randy and Tamar kind of came up with or created for the class. And I found a lot of inspiration in that. And I remember there was a particular technique where it created like a rose-like bubble pattern in the prints. And I tried really hard to recreate that because I thought it was so cool. And also the prints that are hanging in the hallway in Kroger, I love to walk up and down those and just look at the student artwork. Even though I may not know personally who they were, it's kind of a cool connection to see that they were also students there, just like, you know, I was, and that these weren't these blue chip artists out there, you know, they're people like me. So I just drew comfort and inspiration from that in my own work.
great, thanks a lot. And thanks a lot to both of you. I think this was awesome. You know, I'll just give you a hand clap. I don't know if anybody can hear that. But yeah, I think thanks for, you know, becoming a part of this first event. And I just want to tell everybody, it seems like my video is breaking up now, that this is the first event in a month-long series of Wednesday events that we're going to be doing on printmaking at UC Berkeley. And next week, we'll have a tour of the printmaking studio at UC Berkeley that Randy Hassan will bring us through. And then Jennifer Osgood will take us through Peter Koch's printmaking studio in Berkeley. And so we'll get kind of a view from the academic public view and then a private printmaking studio. And then after that, we'll have Professor Todd Olson talking about his experiences with the Graphic Arts Loan Collection as a student. And he's somebody who, again, when I talk to these people who are donors, you know, he became an art history professor, and, you know, I'm sure he was in art history before he checked out any Graphic Arts Loan Collection prints. But he'll be talking to a student about the collection and in 2 weeks' time. And then the last event will have we'll be with Randy Husong talking to some artists in the Bay Area that we recently purchased some of their prints last year, and they've been added to the collection, just like we added Madison's prints to our collection this year and Lucy's prints to our collection. And so on that note, I'm going to say thank you, everybody, for coming to this first event of this series, and hopefully you can come back to the second, third, and fourth events in October. And then if the artists want to say anything before we go, feel free to.
Thank you for hosting us. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to tell everyone about our artwork. And thank you to Randy and Tamar for being really great printmaking teachers.
I'll second that. Thanks, everyone.